everybody. So today we're going to talk about how to finish out your clay projects. Specifically today we're going to talk about glazing, which is the very specific, very shiny glass-like surface that we can have on clay. This is requiring it to go into the kiln again. Usually at not quite the same temperature as the first time. It's like a different temperature range. Glaze itself is made up of water and silica and flux and pigment. So colorful stuff, glass, stuff to make it fuse good, and even a little bit of clay in there to help it fuse as well. But you can see that a lot of glazes are very, very shiny. Some are matte, but this is what gives clay and ceramics that distinctive shiny color that it has. All right. So in order to do this, we're going to need a couple different things. You are going to need, of course, your clay piece. If you don't have that, you've got nothing to paint. You're going to need some glazes. You're going to want a little palette of some kind and some paint brushes. Other things that are going to be useful to have but are not entirely necessary. Water. Please have water. It's going to make your life better. A sponge is very useful for if you mess up. I like to use underglaze pencils to write my name on things. This is essentially a powdery form of this same stuff, like a pencil version of the same thing. So you can use this for drawing on your artworks or, as I said, writing your name. I like to have a little toothpick to help me unclog any gunky bits, and paper towel. One final thing that might be useful to you, you may or may not have access to, and I probably won't be using today, is one of these. This is just a little helper. It's like a Lazy Susan. If I am working and I don't want to be touching my artwork and putting fingerprints in it, in all of my glaze, I can put it on one of these and work from there. This also has the added bonus of helping me not get glaze on the bottom, which you don't want to do. So I will probably not be using this guy, but he is available for you to use if you're here. If you're working somewhere else, you might not have access to one, but I promise it's a Lazy Susan. You can buy them for like $5 on Amazon. It'll be fine. All right, so first thing I got to figure out is what colors I want my my ceramic to be. And I've decided on kind of blues and reddish colors, maybe kind of some greens. And the reason it's important to decide that is because you got to grab your glazes, and if you don't have a little tile that's already been fired with that exact glaze, you kind of have to imagine what this picture is going to look like. So this particular one is an aquamarine. It tends to sink off of the high spots, it seems. This one right here is scarlet, i.e. red. And that one I know for a fact tends to be a little bit more dense, a little bit more solid, kind of like this one. I think this might be the same one, that same red. And this one over here is called Peacock, and it looks like it's a very dark red with some green sprinkles in it, maybe. So I haven't seen this one. This one will be a surprise. Now, what I do have to check, and what you're going to want to check for all of your glazes, is you need to see what cone it is. Cone is symbolized in ceramics with a little delta symbol, i.e. a little triangle. So you can see right here it says cone 05. If it doesn't say it on the lid, it will usually say it somewhere on the jar itself. So you can see it says right here, cone 05. And this one I've already pre-checked. They are also cone 05. Most glazes are anywhere from cone 05 to cone 10. Ours are low fire glazes, meaning they're not going to get very hot, or at least not as hot as the kiln can go. Higher cone glazes tend to be what we call high fire, and my clay itself is not rated to go that hot. I am using a low fire clay and a low fire glaze, meaning they're not going to get crazy, crazy hot for a kiln. Still crazy hot for a human. Don't touch it when it's hot. You'll burn your fingers off. So anyway, beside the point, irrelevant. What I do need to make sure is that all of my glazes are the same cone, because if I have something over here that was cone 04 or cone 06, and I tried to mix it with my cone 05 glazes, it won't work. One of them will not cook all the way through. It'll look goopy and weird, or it might burn if it gets too hot and turn gross and brown, or even melt off. It's not a good situation. The next thing you got to know is that not all glazes mix well. They layer pretty well. Most glazes will layer. like you paint one thing and then you put like purple polka dots on top of like a red background, and those purple polka dots should be fine. They'll just sit on top of the red background. But you can't just take the red and the purple and mix them like paint and then get like a violet red. It's not gonna happen. Most glazes, because of how the pigment works, that is the stuff that makes these turn colors, those pigments, they don't mix well all the time. Now, I do not know about these two. I know that this particular brand right here, Teacher's Choice, it's a very popular one in schools, and it is easy enough to get your hands on, even if you're just a person who's doing glazing in your garage or something like that. This one will mix like paint. So this one I can trust to be kind of like a little workhorse for me. And if I have the same brand in yellow, I could mix them and they would make orange. But not all glazes do that. In fact, when I was a kid, I might put something this gray color onto my artworks, and when it came out of the kiln, it would be bright orange. When I say there is some mystery magic happening in the kiln, I mean it gets real hot in there and chemistry is strange. So be careful, read carefully your labels and things. You want them to be all the same. You want to know if everything is food safe, etc., blah, blah, blah. So all of these ones will mostly turn out as the pictures on the outsides when it's fired. Most of these ones will layer well. And all of these are food safe, meaning if I had him as a bowl, or I have this bowl right here, and I have fired them, I can eat out of it and it won't eventually kill me. So it can happen. Sometimes these are colored with lead, okay? You don't want to eat that. All right, so let's get going. I'm going to open up all of these guys. The first thing to check is that I have a good liquidy glaze. If your glaze is dry, it is easy enough to rehydrate. You just put water in there up until about the same level as you have glaze, and then you let it sit for a couple of days. When I say a couple of days, I mean a couple of days. So again, liquidy in there, nice and sloshy. I opened up a purple earlier and it was like the Sahara Desert, just cracks everywhere. I poured some water in it, I gave it a good shake, and now I've got to wait a day or so, give it another good shake, and then another day or so, and then another good shake. So here's another one. You can see how it gets crusty up at the top. Don't be afraid of that. It's not going to hurt anything. Glaze tends to be pretty thick. All right. So I do have several brushes in front of me. I had 3 brushes and 3 of these guys, so we're going to see how that works. So I think what I'm going to get first is some of my red down here. I'm going to put some onto my palette. It is always something you can get more of. It is very difficult to get rid of glaze or put it back in my little bucket. So be conservative. Glaze is an expensive thing. So I'm just going to kind of scoop some in, give that a rinse off, and last one. Ugh. So differences between glaze and paint. Paint automatically self-levels and smooths out and is super, super shiny. Because glaze is made up of a lot of different gritty pigments, it tends to look very, very matte. We need about 2, maybe 3 coats. 3 coats is best on your little piece. And what I like to do is I like to color everything one color and then add embellishments of other colors. So in this particular case, I think the color that I'm going to use as my base is going to be my tried and true, the very simpler one of my paints here. It was on this brush. I'm going to soak out some of this water, not because it's bad to have, but because it will make my life easier. I'm going to grab this guy and I'm just going to start painting him. I'm going very slapdashery here. I'm going to get all the way between his little limbs. You can already see that one side is drying. That is good to know. You can see where some of it's still patchy. That's okay. This is just my first little layer. As I said, I'm going to need like 3. When it dries down, you will see it get very, very matte immediately. That is good. because it helps you keep track of how many layers you've done. All right, I will come back to you whenever I've got about 3 layers done on here. All right, so I've got a total of 2 layers of my base color on here right now. If I had any major pieces, like if he were bigger, I might have avoided painting things that I knew I was gonna have another color. Like for example, his like nose, if I painted a different color. Again, he's small, so I'm gonna give it the same base coat as everything else, just to make sure I don't miss any spots. Tell me if I missed any, guys. I swear, I thought I looked around. I had to double check under his nose twice, but if he were bigger and I had some other pieces, I might have avoided them and then just painted them another color as a base. But since this guy's pretty small, I just went ahead and painted him the entirety of one color to start with. Now that's 2 layers, and they were pretty thick layers. I might go in with a 3rd layer before doing some of my extra detail work, but I think here I can start pulling out the major things and coloring them what I want them to be colored. Oof, that is soaking up some water. All right, so let me grab my paintbrush here. And I think what I'm gonna do, soak out some of that water so it's not watering down all my glaze. If you have watered down glaze, what you're gonna end up with is spotty color, or something might end up scratchy where the rest ends up glossy. So that squeezing out of water on this brush is actually an important step. You don't want your glaze to be chunky, but you don't want it to be drippy. If your glaze is dripping like a lot, like liquid, that might be a sign of a problem. All right, so this is my darker glaze. So in here, I kind of want to put this where I want some darker stuff. So I think I'm going to give him like a darker end to his tail. I can get a smaller brush if I want this to be more precise. Alas, I don't think I need one for this particular project. I'm trying to be very simplistic on his coloring here. So I'm going to give him a stripe there. And I'm gonna give him a stripe here. Looks pretty good. I'm gonna paint the backs of his ears with this. What I'm trying to focus on is embellishments. So they're not going to be very big things. They're mostly going to be just little detail things here and there. Oh, and I think I'm gonna give him one little front paw that is also this dark color. Now you'll notice I'm turning him a lot of different directions. With this being a 3D piece, there are the ways that you're gonna look at it all the time that are generally gonna be about like so. But he has the ability to be picked up and flipped over. So on occasion, someone's going to want to pick up your artwork and flip it over, meaning you're gonna need to look at it and flip it over when painting it to make sure you don't miss any spots, okay? Now don't worry about the bottom so much. If you have a very big bottom, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but yeah, just be aware. All right, so I've got one little there, and I think one last little thing and another little embellishment. I'll add some stripes on that leg. So he has some stripies there, just little embellishments. Ooh. And I think I'm gonna give him some stripes on that leg. Nothing crazy. Again, small little details that help draw your eye. All right, so I'm gonna set him down and switch to my last color. All right, so my last color, I initially had a fan brush. I don't think I wanna use that brush. I think that brush will be a little bit too much. So I'm gonna use this one again, but that means I do need to give it a pretty good rinse so I don't have any mixing of, guys, because these are the 2 colors that I don't trust. Remember, I don't know how these 2 actually look in the kiln. Ooh, that color is red.
gonna change your water.
All right, so as you can see, this guy is very dry. He's matted down. He doesn't have any shiny spots anymore because everything is dry. So I'm gonna come in with my last color without fear of the colors mixing. Again, I don't know how these ones are gonna mix, so I'm trying not to let them mix. I just want them to sit on top of one another. And now I'm gonna be using my aquamarine, which is my blue color. In this case, it is very different from the other two colors I have that I'm using. So it's my contrast color, meaning this is the one that's gonna stand out and be the one that draws the most attention. So I want this to be in spots that I want to draw attention. So the first place I think I'm gonna put it is gonna be my eyeballs. I'm gonna come in and put it on. If I just had it on the tops of the eyeballs, that's gonna look kind of weird. So I'm gonna try and get all the way down to the edge. And I'm going really slow and really careful. Now, ooh. All right, so learning thing. I drooped where I did not want to droop. So I've got a couple methods of fixing it. One, I can use my sponge if it's a bigger area and just wet it a little bit and give it a squeeze, and this will wipe off what I need to wipe off. Mind you, it will also likely wipe off the layer underneath, so I would need to redo everything. But I did have, where did it go? I had a toothpick. There it is. All right. So what I do have is a toothpick. So what I can do is I can use a little tool like this to scratch off that tiny mess up that I just made. And as long as I'm delicate, it should only go through the stuff that's still pretty wet. So once I've scratched away that mess up, it is now fixed. Now, don't worry if it's a little bit scratchy still. I am going to do another coat of this color. And let's be real, this stuff is going to go in the kiln and actually melt a little bit like glass. When that melts, anything that's scratchy right now should end up smoothing out, and I won't need to worry about it. So there's one little eye. I'm going to come in and I'm going to do the other little eye and a few other little embellishments. And when I come back, you can see what he looks like completely glazed up, though he won't have come out of the kiln yet. All right, so here he is with all of his coats of glaze. You can see again, all of my little gray spots should be blue when they come out. This dark orange should be kind of the darkish blackish, maybe with green speckles. And all of this really pale pink is supposed to come out fire engine red. We will see. We will find out. This is not the only way that you can finish off clay, by the way. This is just glazing. So we're going to talk a little bit about getting him ready for the kiln. So now that he's all painted up, all this stuff on the bottom's got to go away. This stuff, the kiln, well, in the kiln is going to melt into essentially a layer of glass. That's why this is so shiny. So when this all melts into a layer of glass, we can't exactly just pop it off the shelf while it's still liquidy glass. We have to wait for it all to cool down and re-solidify before we won't burn our fingertips off. So if this is allowed to melt while it's on my kiln shelf and then cool down while it's on my kiln shelf, it will fuse to the kiln shelf. And when I try and pop it off, it won't come off, or it'll just break. One of them's gonna break because between the two, and it's not gonna be my kiln shelf. It'll be your little piece. So we don't want any of this glaze on the bottom. Now I still painted there because honestly, it's just a little bit easier to, but it's easy enough to take this off. Now, before I show you how to take that off, I do want to point out one thing that I almost forgot to say. These little toothpick tools are also really good for getting into tiny little crevices. I had to use my toothpick to paint this little side of his foot without getting this side of his body at the same time. So if you have little crevices, just use the appropriate tool to paint there. And again, give him a good look through. Are there any spots that are supposed to have glaze that do not? Because we're about to do the last step of taking off glaze where it's not supposed to be. So I have a couple of things that can be useful to you. I have a damp paper towel right here on my desk, and I have a sponge. So one way that I've seen people do this is by using the damp paper towel. And I've just wet it several times with a sponge. and I've just rubbed him on there really quick, and you can see where I have contact with the tabletop. So I'm going to continue doing that a little bit. And that should give me a pretty good idea of what actually touches my table. You don't actually need to get rid of much more than this, but I do want to clean this up some so that I don't have any bits. You can see right here it's touching, but it's not quite coming off. So here's where my sponge can come in handy. You can also do this straight with a sponge. I just like the tabletop method because then I know exactly what I need to wipe off, and I don't end up wiping off more of his little feetsies than I need to. So I'm going to take this damp sponge, and I'm just going to go over right where that spot was. It'll come up a little bit more, but not too terribly much. Over here, same thing. This one I'm going to need a couple of rinses, I think. With the extra layer of the dark red, I'm not surprised that this one's going to take a little bit more to clean. If there's just a little bit like of staining, then it shouldn't be a problem. It's not really going to get in the way. Same with this little tummy right here. I'm going to get that wiped off. Same with his little bottom of his foot here. I'm going to get that wiped off. And then last bit, it's going to be right here. All right, so now all of that has been dried off. Last thing to make him ready for the kiln is making sure that it's going to get back to me. So in particular, you'll notice that this guy has no name on him. I know he happens to be mine because anytime I've had to fire him, one, I'm the one in control of the kiln and I get to choose that kind of thing. I can find him again. Alas, you do not have that power more than likely. More than likely, if you are a student at a school, then your artwork is being fired with a lot of other person's work. If you're working in any kind of public kiln, your work is being fired with a lot of other people's works. So you need to be able to make sure that it's going to come back to you, which means you need to indicate that it's yours. Hopefully, you've already carved something in when you first made this. You've put your initials, maybe your class period, maybe part of your teacher's name if you're sharing a kiln like we have to do here at this school. And you've already indicated that it's yours. But if you have not, now is the time. And I have a tool for you that you will like. Now, can you just carve it in or whatever? Yeah. Can you draw it on with a pencil? No, that pencil will burn off in the kiln. Unless you have a very specific underglaze pencil. This works the same as any pencil. You can use it to draw on designs to your artwork. If I wanted to like doodle on a little flower on his head, I could do that with this. But right now, I'm just going to use it to put on my little symbol here. Oh, that squeaks bad. Oh, it squeaks. All right, so that is my little call sign. If I had to graffiti something, now you know what I've graffitied because I told you. Don't tell anyone, shh. Anyway, so you can use your initials, any other thing that your teacher may tell you to put on the bottom, use. If you're doing just for yourself in a public kiln, it might be like part of your phone number. I don't know. Whatever you want to use to represent you and anyone else is able to recognize it as yours is going to work just fine. So that's written there on my piece. When he goes in the kiln, he will probably be on a tiny stilt so that only a little bit of him touches just in case something does drip. He won't fuse. But that there is our completed little guy. He will go into the kiln overnight at cone 05 because that is what our glaze requires. And when he comes back out, he should be nice and shiny like this. Bye.